I'm a teacher at Colin High School. There is a student here with a gun.
He's inside the school shooting at the gun!
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
After shooting in the theater, I didn't have a plan of whether to die or not.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining me once again for another video. Today's case was suggested by one of my members, so thank you to YouPostCringe for recommending it. It's definitely an older, lesser-known case, but I found it to be pretty interesting. If you would like to suggest a case for me to cover in the future, or get access to other perks, please consider joining my membership. To check it out, please click the join button below, or follow the link in the description or pinned comment. I want to preface this video by saying that information regarding the smaller details of this case varied greatly from source to source, so I did my best to find the most accurate details to share with you all. I'm not sure if it's because this case is a little on the older side, or what, but some sources speak of the same events, just happening at slightly different times, especially with the shooter's life prior to the attack. With that being said, if you notice something to be incorrect or incomplete, please let me know in the comments, and I will do my best to relay the information. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right into today's case, starting with talking about the shooter and his life prior to his violent attack. Colin Ferguson was born on January 14, 1958, to his parents, Vaughn and May, in Kingston, Jamaica. Colin's father was a very wealthy and successful man, and was even described by Time magazine as, quote, one of the most prominent businessmen in Jamaica, unquote. Colin had a very privileged upbringing. He lived in an affluent part of town and attended a private school growing up. He graduated in 1974 and was described by the principal as being a well-rounded student. 4 years later, in 1978, Colin's father, Vaughn, was killed in a car accident. Not too long after his death, Colin's mom, May, also passed away from cancer. Both of his parents' deaths severely impacted the finances, and it is said that the family fortune completely crumbled. Family members of Colin later said that this affected him greatly. In 1982, Colin moved to the United States on a visa, attempting to set down roots in the country and build a better life for himself, one like he had before his parents' deaths. Some of his friends later said that he immediately had a hard time finding work other than small, simple jobs. They also recalled that Colin seemed to have been dealing with a lot of racism towards him at this time. In 1986, 4 years after he first arrived in the United States, Colin met and married an American woman of Jamaican descent named Audrey Warren. The marriage granted Colin permanent residency within America. Eventually, the couple settled down in the state of Long Island, with some sources claiming they had a son together. But they were far from happy. According to reports, the two of them fought constantly, and it even got so bad that the police would be called out to help diffuse the tension on multiple occasions. A little over 2 years into their marriage, Audrey filed for divorce, claiming the reasoning was that they had differing social views. However, despite her claim, her friends later stated that the real reason Audrey left Colin was because he was extremely aggressive and antagonistic towards her. Audrey also won full custody over their son. After their divorce, Colin landed a clerical job for a security device company in New York. On August 18, 1989, he slipped and fell while standing on a stool and injured his head, neck, and back. He was apparently eventually terminated from the company as a result of this accident. After he was let go, Colin filed a complaint with the New York Workers' Compensation Agency, but the case remained open for years following the submission. In the meantime, Colin enrolled at Nassau Community College, and he even made the dean's list 3 times. Despite these achievements, Colin's behavior wasn't great. He was forcibly removed from a class on at least one occasion, after acting reportedly overly aggressive towards the teacher. In the later part of 1990, Colin transferred from Nassau Community College to Adelphi University, where he went on to major in business administration. It was here that he began to become very vocal about his issues with racism and the apparent attacks on him. According to some reports, Colin would repeatedly declare that everyone around him was being racist towards him, and on one occasion in particular, he accused a white woman of shouting racist remarks at him after he asked her a simple question. However, after a small investigation, it was concluded that this never happened, and that Colin was making the whole thing up. Sometime after this event, Colin attended a conference in which the professor discussed her experiences with racial segregation in South Africa. In the middle of the presentation, Colin stood up and shouted, quote,
"We should be talking about the revolution in South Africa and how to get rid of the white people,"
unquote. He also reportedly said, quote,
"Kill everybody white,"
unquote. Despite people nearby attempting to calm him down, Colin threatened them, repeatedly saying, quote,
"The black revolution will get you,"
unquote. Following this episode, Colin was suspended from the university. Later that same year, in June of 1991, Colin was now living in the neighborhood of Flatbush, Brooklyn, in New York. His neighbors later recalled that he dressed nicely, but rarely ever said a word to anyone, apart from hello. They also described his overall behavior as odd. His landlord at the time later said, quote, "He had delusions of grandeur. He felt like, I'm such a great person. There must be only one thing holding me back. It must be white people," unquote. I'm sure you are beginning to see a pattern forming. The theme of race and racism is very prevalent in this case, and it will become even more apparent as we continue on. Anyway, in 1992, Colin's ex-wife, Audrey, made a complaint to the police that he had come and tried to pry her car's trunk open. The two of them had had no contact ever since their divorce in 1988. I wasn't able to find anything else regarding this incident, so we will just move on. In February of the same year, Colin was arrested and charged with harassing a woman on the subway. Apparently, a woman attempted to sit next to him, since the seat was vacant. But upon doing so, Colin began to scream at her and forcibly push her out of the seat. Police arrived quickly and pinned him down to the ground. Colin reportedly attempted to escape the police's grasp and shouted, quote,
"Brothers, come help me,"
unquote. Following his arrest, Colin sent letters to many officials, including the New York City Police Commissioner, complaining about his arrest. He described it as vicious and racist, also claiming that he was a victim of police brutality. His claims were investigated, but were ultimately dismissed. Later that year, in September of 1992, Colin was finally awarded over $26,000 as a result of his workers' compensation claim against the security company that he had gotten injured at and terminated from. In April of 1993, Colin claimed that due to still being in pain and needing medical treatment, he was entitled to more money. Going along with this, Colin sought out legal representation, visiting a firm in Manhattan for a consultation. An attorney that worked there, Lauren Abramson, reportedly felt so immediately uncomfortable around Colin that she had someone sit in on the consultation with her, which she had never done before in her career. Apparently, despite his clean and tidy appearance, Colin was anything but professional. He reportedly acted extremely strange during the consultation, even identifying himself by a false name before eventually giving his real name up. Information about this is really limited, but going off of the following information, it's safe to say that the law firm did not go forward with working with him. In the months following, Colin placed multiple threatening calls to members of the law firm, even mentioning a prior massacre that took place in California during one of these calls. His frightening behavior was enough to prompt the lawyers to begin taking extra security measures, namely locking their inner office doors. Colin still attempted to have the New York Workers' Compensation Agency reevaluate his claim, hoping they would finally grant him more money. Unfortunately for him, they ultimately rejected the case. Due to his increasingly odd behavior, he was reportedly placed on a list of potentially dangerous people, and they urged the security guards to keep an eye out for him. Shortly after this, Colin moved to California in search of a better career opportunity. His attempts yielded no benefit for him, though, as he was unable to land even the most menial of jobs. According to one of his friends, after Colin applied for a job at a car wash, he was laughed at by the manager. While in California, Colin purchased a Ruger P89 9mm pistol in Long Beach for $400 after waiting the 15 days for his application to clear. After less than a month of living in California, in May of 1993, Colin made the decision to move back to New York. According to one of his friends, he moved back because he did not like competing with immigrants and Hispanics for jobs. Upon returning, Colin's mental state seemed to have gone downhill dramatically. Those around him claimed that he began to speak in the third person and often spoke about black people rising up against their oppressors. He also apparently took 5 showers a day around this time and could be heard at night continuously chanting, quote, "All the black people killing all the white people," unquote. Due to this concerning behavior, he was asked by his landlord to move out by the end of that month. There was really nothing I could find about what he did after moving out, so let's just skip ahead. Now, let's move on to the day that makes this case known. It was a little after 5 p.m. on December 7th, 1993, when Colin Ferguson boarded an eastbound train at Penn Station in Manhattan, New York. With him, over 80 other passengers occupied the third train car. Little did anyone know that the man seated near the back of the train was armed with a pistol and around 160 rounds of ammunition. As the train moved along the tracks, Ferguson built himself up to do the unthinkable. Just as the train approached the Maryland Avenue station, Ferguson stood up, pulled his pistol out, and began to fire at random throughout the train car. One passenger, Mary Phillips, who was sitting directly next to Ferguson, later said during his trial, quote, "He looked me dead in the eye and pointed the gun, and with the most serious look I have ever seen on anyone's face, he shot me in the chest," unquote. The bullet entered her upper torso and exited the side of her body, re-entering her arm, shattering her bone. Mary then proceeded to play dead. She later recalled this time, quote, "I was afraid Mr. Ferguson would see me alive," unquote. People immediately got down and tried to hide in any way possible. One passenger, Lisa Combati, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, later stated, quote, "The doors closed, and I heard this popping sound. I thought maybe it was a car backfiring, so I looked out the window, and that wasn't it. I looked behind me, and I saw Colin Ferguson coming down the aisle, just shooting left to right, unquote. After he began his attack, Ferguson walked calmly and steadily towards the front of the train, stopping at each seat, turning towards anyone occupying the area, and shooting them point blank. He apparently said, quote, "I'm going to get you," unquote, over and over again as he made his way down the aisle. Lisa attempted to escape but found the doors to the next train car locked. Instead, she laid down and got into the fetal position. Despite her attempts to protect herself and her unborn baby, Ferguson shot her. Thankfully, both she and her baby ended up surviving. In the chaos that ensued, 25 people were hit, 6 of them passing away from their injuries. At some point, the train came to a stop, but wasn't fully in the station yet. This left many of the passengers in the cars ahead of the one Ferguson had just massacred confused as to what was happening. Suddenly, passengers in the train's second car were startled when a flood of people rushed into the space from the third car. The frantic people quickly pried the exterior doors open and fled into the station. An announcement was given to the train's conductor to not open the doors yet, as the train was not fully in place. However, after hearing about the shooting that was happening, one of the engineers, Thomas Silhan, took it upon himself to crawl out of one of the windows and open all of the remaining exposed train doors from the outside, allowing people to escape. It had been less than 3 minutes since Ferguson began his violent attack, and he had already emptied 2 15-round magazines. As he was reloading the third magazine, some nearby passengers saw an opportunity to take him down. After someone yelled, quote, "Get him," unquote, 3 men, Michael O'Connor, Kevin Blum, and Mark McEntee, all tackled Ferguson and pinned him to one of the seats. More people joined in to hold him down as they waited for authorities to arrive. Apparently during this time, Ferguson said, quote, "Oh God, what did I do? What did I do? I deserve whatever I get. Don't shoot me. I'm sorry, unquote. There was an off-duty officer nearby who was able to board the train car and officially place Ferguson under arrest, marking the end to the tragedy. In Ferguson's pockets, authorities recovered a few pieces of notebook paper with, quote, "reasons for this," unquote, as the heading. On the same note, Ferguson made a reference to his previous arrest after assaulting the woman on the subway. The entry read, quote, "The false allegations against me by the filthy Caucasian racist female on the number 1 line," unquote. He also vented about his absolute hatred for his former school, Adelphi University. I also read that he made note of his distaste of white and Asian people. Also written on the paper, Ferguson wrote clearly about his anger towards the New York State Workers' Compensation Agency. The notes also contained the telephone numbers for the law firm he had previously threatened, along with the caption, quote, "Those corrupt black attorneys who not only refused to help me, but tried to steal my car," unquote. According to the writing, Ferguson had the plan to wait until the train was beyond the New York City limit to begin the attack. Anyway, after being arrested, Ferguson sat completely emotionless in the back of the police car, which enraged some of the nearby bystanders. One person shouted, quote, "How can he be sitting there so calm after everything he did?" unquote. His seemingly calm demeanor continued throughout his later questioning, and he was reported to have shown no remorse for the pain and suffering that he caused. Authorities claimed that he was lucid and aware of what was going on during that time. The short but very deadly attack was over, but the effects from it would continue to live on. Those killed in the attack were 24-year-old Richard Nettleton, 27-year-old Amy Beth Federici, 27-year-old Kim Mi-kyung, 30-year-old Marita Magtoto, 51-year-old James Garicki, and 52-year-old Dennis McCarthy. Ferguson was arraigned the next day, December 8, 1993, and he did not speak a word during the hearing. He also did not enter a plea at this time. Following the hearing, he was ordered to be held without bail. As he was being escorted out of the courthouse, a reporter asked Ferguson if he hated white people, to which he just replied, quote, "It's a lie," unquote. Now let's get into Ferguson's bizarre pre-trial and trial. I do want to add that I didn't include every detail, but if you want to learn more about the trial, there are documentaries out there that you can watch. Shortly after the shooting, a man named Anthony Falanga was appointed to be Ferguson's attorney. Anthony called for a mental health evaluation to be performed on his client, as he was trying to set up a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Not too long after Anthony began to represent him, Ferguson requested that he be replaced by another attorney, Colin Moore, who was known for pursuing cases involving racism. Colin even offered his services to Ferguson pro bono. However, it didn't take long for the two of them to stop working with one another, citing unexplained conflicts. Ferguson was able to speak with a psychiatrist, and after their talk, the expert stated in his report that he felt Ferguson might be feigning his mental illnesses. However, in contrast to this claim, a report made by a court-appointed psychologist and psychiatrist concluded that Ferguson was indeed suffering from a mental illness, paranoid personality disorder to be exact. They did add in, though, that he was competent enough to stand trial. Just a little over a month after the shooting took place, Ferguson was indicted on 93 various counts. They included 2 counts of murder for each victim that was killed, 19 counts of attempted murder, 34 counts of assault, along with many other miscellaneous charges. In March of 1994, the year after the shooting took place, it was announced that due to his request, Ferguson would be represented by new attorneys, this time William Kunstler and Ron Kuby. Ferguson was obviously being held behind bars at this time, and he made accusations of neglect at the hands of the guards. He claimed that the guards had been attacking him with milk crates and fire extinguishers. He also stated that they were depriving him of his necessities, such as deodorant and soap. Ferguson said, quote, "Of course, there is no sympathy for me in the institution. When I suffered and screamed, I was told that it was a good sign by the prison guards because they were hoping for my swift departure from life," unquote. One of his lawyers, Ron, reportedly warned the jail that an attack on Ferguson was most likely going to take place sometime soon. Apparently, another inmate had told Ron about the upcoming planned incident. On March 23, 1994, that warning became a reality. Ferguson was attacked by a group of inmates upon his return to his cell from the medical unit. His injuries included a broken nose and a swollen left eye. These inmates were charged with second-degree assault in connection with the attack. Later that year, Ferguson's lawyers claimed that in addition to potential physical attacks, the guards were also taunting Ferguson about the election of George Pataki, the new governor of New York, who was an open death penalty supporter. They repeatedly told him that he would be put to death if he were found guilty. Before the trial, Ferguson's attorneys, William and Ron, decided on a unique defense called the Black Rage. This term was first introduced in a book written by a few psychologists in 1968. In the book, the psychologists claimed that black people living in a racist environment often act abnormally in certain situations. According to his lawyers, Ferguson had been pushed into insanity by constant racial prejudice and was subsequently not able to be held liable for his actions on the day of the shooting, even though he was responsible. They compared the black rage defense to that of the battered woman defense, post-traumatic stress disorder, and child abuse syndrome when they were used in other cases to absolve the defendant of responsibility. According to them, the idea that Ferguson acted out of rage was supported with the notes that were found in his pockets on the day of the shooting. Following this, Ferguson apparently began to claim that he had absolutely no part in the shootings altogether. William and Ron made a request to have him undergo a mental evaluation once again, as he was starting to show concerning signs of delusional thinking. Despite this request, Ferguson himself personally rejected the idea of having another evaluation performed. He made it clear to his attorneys that he did not want to use any form of insanity defense. Despite his disapproval, William and Ron went forward with using this type of defense anyway. During this time, Ferguson apparently wrote multiple letters to the judge, claiming that he was not mentally ill and that he did not want to use the black rage defense. In the end, Ferguson made the decision to fire both William and Ron from his team. A mental health evaluation was finally performed on Ferguson after he eventually agreed. It was, once again, found that he was competent to stand trial. When the trial began, despite multiple recommendations against him defending himself, he made the decision to do so anyway. In his opening statement, Ferguson said,
"There were 93 counts to that indictment. 93 counts, only because it matches the year 1993. Had it been 1925, it would have been 25 counts.
During the trial, Ferguson questioned and cross-examined the victims that were injured in the shooting, as well as the officers that had arrested him that day, and multiple passengers that were not injured. One of the victims was Lisa Combati, who I mentioned earlier. During her questioning, Ferguson asked her, quote, "Do you know who shot you?" unquote. Lisa replied saying, quote, "Yes, you shot me," unquote. Ferguson also questioned Kevin McCarthy, whose dad was shot and killed in front of him. This is where the trial took its strange turn. Despite several victims identifying him as the shooter, Ferguson introduced the idea that he was not the killer. Referring to himself in the third person, Ferguson stated,
The evidence will show that Colin Ferguson was in fact a well-meaning passenger on the train, and also a well-meaning passenger transporting to safe haven a firearm, which in fact he purchased legally. At the time that Mr. Ferguson was on the train, like any other passenger, he dozed off, having the weapon in a bag. At that point, someone opened the bag, took the weapon out of the bag, and proceeded to shoot.
That's not the weirdest part, though. Ferguson also claimed that the government had implanted a computer chip into his brain, and he actually had a witness to back this up, whom he apparently decided not to call to the stand last minute. This witness was a man named Raul Diaz, a parapsychologist from Manhattan. According to him, he was trying to expose a conspiracy involving the US government. Outside of the courtroom, Raul spoke to the media, claiming that the government set Ferguson up to keep Raul quiet about the information that he had. According to Raul, he claimed that prior to the attack, he had witnessed an Asian man pushing a chip into Ferguson's head. Raul later stated that with a single push of a button, Ferguson was forced to walk up the train aisle and shoot people. Ferguson originally planned to question himself on the stand, but ultimately decided not to do so. He also intended to call multiple witnesses to the stand, including eyewitnesses, a ballistics expert, and a handwriting expert, all of which were apparently too afraid to come to the stand. Therefore, none of them were ever called. Ferguson stated that he would be killed in prison if convicted, and also said that the prison attack and murder of Jeffrey Dahmer was, quote, set up as a prelude against me, unquote. Finally, on February 17, 1995, Ferguson was convicted for the deaths of the 6 victims and the 19 attempted murder charges. He was sentenced to over 315 years to life in prison. The judge said, quote, "Colin Ferguson will never return to society and will spend the rest of his natural life in prison," unquote. Now let's talk about the unfortunate victims of this case. Similar to how some details regarding this shooting were hard to find, it was nearly impossible to find any information regarding most of the victims. I did my best, and of course want to give them their time in the video. Richard Nettleton was born on February 15, 1969, making him 24 years old at the time of his death. According to a newspaper printed around the time of the massacre, Richard enjoyed writing and playing the drums. Amy Beth Federici was 27 years old when she was killed, born in 1966. Sadly, she had recently lost her husband to liver and pancreatic cancer just 3 months after they got married. Originally, she planned to stay in the area that they lived in, but she ultimately decided to move away after landing a new job. 27-year-old Kim Mi-kyung was born on September 3, 1966. Her sister spoke about her saying, quote, "Mi-kyung was a really sparkling and intelligent and artistic and creative person who was just beginning to figure out what she wanted to do in life," unquote. Her sister recalled that even though they were 5 years apart in age, they were more like twins. Marita Magtoto was 29 or 30 years old, born in 1963. She had reportedly just gotten a new job in Manhattan. Her husband later said that the two of them were going to be traveling to the Philippines the next week to visit her mother for the holidays. James Richard Garicki was born on October 1, 1942, and was 51 years old when he was killed. His wife, Joyce, described him as one of the nicest people you could meet, going out of his way to do something kind for someone whenever he had the chance. James's wife became an advocate for gun control following his death. Dennis McCarthy was born on September 18, 1941, making him 52 years old at the time of his death. Dennis was with his son, Kevin, on the day of his death, as the two of them commuted to and from work together. His son was severely injured in the shooting but ended up surviving. Carolyn McCarthy, the wife of Dennis McCarthy and mother to Kevin McCarthy, ended up going on to become part of the United States Congress. Apparently, she strived to become elected after the representative in her area voted against an assault weapons ban. She spent her career advocating for stricter gun control. She was in office from 1997 to 2015. Thank you all for watching until the end of this video. I hope you found it to be informative. And like mentioned in the beginning, if you caught any mistakes, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I appreciate all of you, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, stay safe.